groups instead of individual users. Never use individual to assign groups. You can manage the role assignment of groups using PIM to ensure that there are no standing owners or members in these privileged groups. A global administrator or privileged role administrator can delegate role management on per role basis by using groups as well. And then it may be the case that an individual user, sometimes a single user has 5 or 6 eligible assignment to Azure AD roles through PIM. They will have to activate each role individually, which is not efficient. And of course, it will reduce productivity. Because always a compromise between security and productivity. We need to find the balance between both. You could do is to create a privileged access group in privileged identity management and grant it permanent access to multiple roles. Then you can make the user an eligible member of or owner of this group. With just one activation, they will have access to all the linked resources. This is the access group in PIM. Last, we try to use the cloud native account for Azure AD roles and try to avoid using on-premises synced account to the Azure AD role assignment. Because of if the on-premises account is compromised, of course, it can also compromise your Azure AD resources as well. So those are the best practices for assignment. Moving now to the last topic that we need to discuss is about identity governance for access reviews and entitlement management. Also very important topic on the exam. Now I put here on the slide, CP2, the title, to just as a reminder that those features, during case scenario, you might know that this feature requires a P2 license. One of the best practices that I mentioned before is to perform recurring access review for users and administrators. An access review is part of identity governance in Azure AD. You need to have Azure AD P2 license. If you have the required permissions, you need the global admin, user admin, or identity governance administrator, you can go to the identity governance page, the Azure AD, and set up access review for your users. Recently, Microsoft added the capability to review and remove inactive users in Azure AD. So when you create a new access review, you can check the box next to the inactive users on tenant level, as shown in this screenshot. And the scope of the review will focus on inactive users only. Those who have not signed in either interactively or non-interactively to your tenant. Then you specify days inactive with a number of days up to 2 years, 730 days. Please check the URL on the slide to see how to create an access review of groups and applications. Anyway, you don't get a question on how to create an access review in the exam, but of course, you want to understand what you can do with access review, you'll get a question around that. You can also manage guest access with Azure AD access reviews as part of Azure AD B2B feature. Guest users from other tenants can be invited by administrators or by other users as well. We can decide whether to ask each guest to review their own access or to ask one or more users to review every guest's access. Now, talking about entitlement management. Now, when you have application centrally authenticated driven from Azure AD, you can streamline your access request, approval, and recertification process to make sure that the right people have the right access and that you have a track of why users in your organization have the access they have. Again, another feature in Azure AD, identity governance, P2 license, expensive, I understand, is entitlement management. You can use entitlement management to create access packages that users can request as they join different teams or projects, and then assign them access to the associated resources, such as applications, SharePoint site, or group memberships. If deploying entitlement management is not possible to implement today, then at least you can enable a new self-service paradigms by deploying self-service group management and self-service application access. So you can use self-service application to let users self-discover application from the My Apps portal, myapps.microsoft.com, without bothering the IT department when they need access to application. And those users to pre-configure group, so you can see who has requested access, removed access, and manage the roles assigned to them. So this is, we have concluded module 1 on designing a zero trust strategy and architecture. It took more than 1 hour, but this is very, has a lot of percentage in the exam. Let's take a quick couple of questions before we move to the knowledge check. What we have here. I was recording the recording. Will you get the transcript as well? Yes, transcript will be as well. Exactly. You can see transcripts, what everything shared today. You can have them as transcript. Next question. Can Microsoft Azure RBAC capabilities be leveraged to implement RBAC control to Azure custom defined RBAC rule for access source, transaction, function, etc. within Azure customer developer application? I understood the question well. Microsoft Azure RBAC capabilities to be leveraged to implement RBAC role. Do you define custom roles? With Azure RBAC, yes, you can create custom roles and set them based on whatever you want. So you can use a built-in RBAC role like Microsoft has, and you can also create your own custom RBAC role and define that as well. Why accessing cloud server must be based on password-less authentication? Because the latest feature that Microsoft included for passwordless on the device is they have a TPM chip, and they use the business required, the device compliance. You can also use the passwordless to authenticate instead of using traditional access. This also passwordless could be the visual of the user to identify, and he doesn't need to type the password. It's more secure than using the traditional password. That's why they recommend also to use passwordless authentication. Yes, next. Good things are P2. Yes, I agree about this. Good things, yeah. We don't want to comment about business behind this, the P2 license. Yes, I had some answer there. Thanks. Thank you. Anyway, the recording is there, so you can watch it and review before the exam. It looks like the context-based access control is not included in this exam. Yes, it's not mentioned there in the objective. Perfect. So let's move into knowledge check. Are you ready to move to knowledge check? Let's move. Okay. Module 1, a small case study about design a zero trust strategy and architecture. Contoso is a fictitious home improvement retailer. It operates retail hardware stores across the globe and online. The CISO is aware of the opportunities offered by the Azure, but also understand the need for strong security and solid cloud architecture. Without strong security and a great point of reference architecture, the company may have difficulty managing the Azure environment and cost, which are hard to track and control. The CISO is interested in understanding how Azure manages and enforces security standards. Okay, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to do a small case study before we move to the next couple of questions, multiple choice questions. Are you ready? I will send pulse check. Please thumb up if you are ready to move to the questions. First one is develop security requirements based on the organizational dimensional goals or very good. And we have 100% on the correct answer. And this is the correct answer actually to identify the integration points for architecture using the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. So say congratulations to everyone. First question is done, succeeded 100%. Next question. How can Contoso enable IT administrators to integrate their current Windows Server Active Directory solution located on premises with Microsoft Azure Active Directory? Again, we have three possible answers here. The first possible answer is design, implement a secure hybrid identity environment, or use familiar Azure services and management capabilities regardless of where they live, or use Azure Policy to define common use cases by using built-in available in the Azure environment. Again, I will send a pulse check to see when you are ready. Please thumb up to make sure that you are ready to answer the questions before we move to the results. So how can Contoso enable IT admins to integrate their current Server Active Directory solution located on premises with Microsoft Azure Active Directory? A few more seconds. Perfect. Let's move to the results. And we have here 80% on the design, implement secure hybrid identity. 6.5% the second answer, use familiar Azure services or Azure Policy. So the correct answer here is to design and implement a secure hybrid identity environment with Azure AD Connect. So the first, which is most answers correctly. So the first is the right answer. Design and implement a secure hybrid identity with Azure AD Connect. Now moving to the third question for the module 1 is how can Contoso enforce organizational standards and assess compliance at scale? Again, three possible answers here. First one, use Azure Policy to enable replication and to audit VM protection. Use conditional access to resources based on devices, identity assurance, network location, and more. Or use Azure Policy to implement governance for resource consistency. So how can Contoso enforce organizational standards and assess compliance at scale? Again, I will send a pulse check to get the sense when you are ready. So how can Contoso enforce organizational standard and assess compliance at scale? Few more seconds before we move to the results. Okay, we'll end the pulse check and move to the results. We have 0 on the Azure Policy to enable replication and audit VM protection. We have 21% around 20% around give conditional access to resource based on devices, identity, assurance, network location, and more. And the correct answer, which has highest percentage, is to use Azure Policy to implement governance for resource consistency. This is the right answer to enforce organizational standard and assess compliance at scale. Azure Policy is the right solution in this context. Perfect. Now we are ready to move to first break. 10 minutes. We'll go to a break, and then we will resume in 10 minutes. So I will send the timer, and then we join back after 10 minutes.